but I think that it was not a question of marriage at all. There was a certain satisfaction in doing something that was going to alleviate the sufferings of women in particular, and I was quite a feminist at the time.
Obviously.
And yes, and I naturally didn't want to see women take all the suffering of childbearing and of pregnancies. So it was a pleasure, in a sense, to think that you were striking at an archaic law.
Margaret Sanger spent nearly a century fighting for birth control, despite rampant criticism from those who disagreed with her ideals. She refused to be discouraged after being banned, jailed, and challenged countless times. This is her story.
Campaigning for Contraception.
Margaret Sanger's Advocacy for Reproductive Rights.
By Phoebe Roberts and Aubrey Schultz. During the 1910s, Margaret Sanger considered it her moral responsibility to promote contraception. Through her activism, she secured reproductive rights for women and acceptance of birth control.
Margaret founded the birth control movement after decades of extreme shame surrounding sex and women's bodies. Women had few rights and were seen as impure if they used birth control or had sex before marriage. Americans feared information regarding contraceptives and thought it was unclean.
Anthony Comstock seized their fear and used it to propel his movement against birth control. In 1872, Comstock took it as his responsibility as a devout Christian to found the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice, or the NYSSV. He used the funds from the club's wealthy male members to lobby the New York and Congress legislature.
In 1873, the Comstock Act was passed. It outlawed the distribution and sale of birth control, calling it pornography. The act also classified sex, marriage, women's advocacy for equal treatment, and procreation in lower classes as obscenity. The Comstock Act denied women the right to autonomy, cementing their societal role as lowly. The act went against everything Margaret strived for.
Comstock enlisted the NYSSV and the YMCA to assist him in his fight against vice. He would later brag that he charged enough people to fill a 60-car train, demolished hundreds of tons of materials he deemed inappropriate, and driven multiple women to suicide. Author Amy Sohn explained that as a 67-year-old woman facing a 10-year prison sentence, you were almost certain you were going to die in prison. And that is why some of the women Comstock was able to prosecute took their own lives.
Margaret would dedicate her life to striking down the Comstock Act, liberating women from oppression. Margaret Sanger was inspired to procure reproductive rights for women by her mother Anne's traumatic story. Anne Purcell Higgins had 11 children and 7 miscarriages. She died at 50. After Anne's death, Margaret told her father, Michael Hennessy Higgins, "You caused this. Mother is dead from having too many children."
Determined to avoid her mother's fate, Margaret decided to pursue a career in obstetric nursing. She went to a nursing school in the Catskills, later taking a job as a visiting nurse in New York City's Lower East Side.
There, Margaret frequently met impoverished women who asked her what the secret to family limitation was. They couldn't prevent pregnancies or support a large family, so they resorted to $5 abortions or attempted their own, risking extreme illness or death.
Margaret was often called to rectify failed abortions. She did her best, but she couldn't save many of her clients. One patient, Sadie Sachs, had nearly died from a previous self-induced abortion and asked her doctor how to prevent children. She was told, "Make your husband sleep on the roof." She became pregnant again and attempted a second abortion. Her hysterical husband found her on the floor and called Margaret, who could do nothing more than hold her hand as she died.
Margaret reflected in an autobiography, "It was the dawn of a new day in my life. I knew that no matter what it might cost, I was resolved to seek out the root of evil, to do something to change the destiny of mothers, whose miseries were as vast as the sky."
Margaret felt responsible for their unnecessary deaths, motivating her to champion the movement for reproductive rights.
Margaret saw it as her responsibility to educate the Lower East Side about birth control. She advocated for women's rights to contraception by distributing pamphlets and founding Planned Parenthood. She served as Planned Parenthood's president from 1952 to 59. Her booklets, The Woman Rebel, Family Limitation, and What Every Girl Should Know, described birth control methods in detail. Although they were classified as obscene and banned by the U.S. Postal Service, the pamphlets changed the lives of countless women. Initially, widespread opinions on contraception were negative, but Margaret's martyrdom popularized the movement. Despite the illegality of sexual education, she upheld her responsibility to teach people about contraception. Margaret was charged with violating the Comstock Act twice. She was first charged with dispensing illegal pamphlets in 1915, but her charges were dropped after the unexpected death of her 5-year-old daughter, Peggy.
2 years later, she and her sister Ethel Byrne were sentenced to 30 days at Blackwell Prison for establishing an illicit birth control clinic in New York. There, Ethel went 5 days without eating or drinking in protest of the New York state laws against contraception. Her stunt landed her and Margaret in the Chicago Daybook and caught the attention of women across America. It wasn't long before Margaret Sanger went from an unrecognized activist to a household name.
She further publicized the birth control movement with the help of Ethel Byrne, Fania Mindel, and Catherine McCormick, pushing government officials to reevaluate the Comstock Act, granting women rights. Catherine helped Margaret plan the first American birth control conference in 1921 and illegally shipped diaphragms to Margaret's clinic from Europe. Margaret took advantage of her newfound popularity, lecturing about women's right to contraception in Japan and India. She gained the support of ministers, government officials, and even Gandhi.
Margaret also did an American speech tour in 17 cities, but Portland was the only one that arrested her for distribution of pamphlets. The pamphlets included information about birth control methods. Portland welcomed her at first, but when the pamphlets were distributed, she was arrested.
Margaret saw eugenics, or selective breeding, as a way of accumulating approval from the medical community, which was mainly composed of racist male doctors and scientists. She pitched birth control as a way to wipe out traits like disabilities and dark skin. She felt the responsibility to succeed as the leader of the birth control movement, so she used eugenics to expand it.
Margaret fought for women's rights by establishing Planned Parenthood and pushing for the invention and legalization of new contraceptives. Even after she relinquished her role as Planned Parenthood's president, the organization continued to educate women about reproductive health.
In the 1950s, Margaret sought help from biologist Gregory Pincus. He developed the world's first birth control pill, Enivid, through unsafe trials on poor women in Puerto Rico, where birth control was legal.
Enivid was approved for married couples in 1965. By the end of the year, more than 500,000 American women took it. In the 70s, Enivid was approved for unmarried customers.
In 1983, the Comstock Act was overturned. Since American women were legally permitted to prevent pregnancies, the number of women who pursued higher education and careers skyrocketed. The age of marriage was pushed back several years for both genders. Without Margaret, women would be destitute of the freedom and rights we take for granted today.
However, much of the progress she made in her career is currently being stripped away by pro-life groups. Iowan anti-birth control organization Pulse Life Advocates states that birth control is adjacent to abortion and kills babies. In the Supreme Court case, Burwell v. Hobby Lobby stores, Obama's mandate that employers had to include contraception in group health plans was overturned. The owners of Hobby Lobby claimed that the mandate violated their First Amendment rights and denied them religious freedom.
Opponents of birth control are overlooking the tremendous social changes that the 1965 approval of contraception ushered in. When women were granted the right to contraceptives, they were granted true respect in workplaces and schools. Birth control access allowed women to take initiative in their careers and lives. We all have a responsibility to ensure that it's upheld.
Margaret Sanger saw it as her responsibility to humanity to free women from restrictive and sexist laws that prevented them from following their dreams.
Her 20th century campaign for contraception has shaped our nation and world. Margaret Sanger died knowing she fulfilled her responsibility to secure reproductive rights for women, pivoting the course of history.